Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as always, it is an honor to be able to stand up and represent the people of Battle River Crowfoot in this place. And I just want to emphasize something very, very significant, Madam Speaker, that my colleague, the member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound, talked about before. And it was a statement that I think bears repeating because of its significance. It is the fact that MPs should be representing their constituents in Ottawa, not Ottawa to their constituents. And Madam Speaker, it is that attitude to which I endeavor to bring each and every day that I come to this chamber. Now, let me talk just a moment about this chamber, because it bears, I think, emphasis in light of what we're debating here this evening, which is changes to the standing orders, and specifically the amendment that I think is very reasonable brought forward by the opposition House Leader to see a sunset on the changes that the government is, I would dare to say, ramming through this place with little consultation and certainly a great concern that is brought up by many as to what the implications of these things might be. But to speak specifically about this place, Madam Speaker, you know, for more than 8 centuries, there has been a parliamentary process that has evolved and been developing to get us to the point where we are here today. From the fields of Runningmead through the foundations of responsible government, when we took, when there were some pivotal moments, when Robert Baldwin and Louis Lafontaine I believe it was in Montreal, saw about the foundation of what was called responsible government. And Madam Speaker, to the point when we had our first parliamentary elections and the appointment of Sir John A. Macdonald as our first Prime Minister, the times when Canada became a nation, when we saw a burning down of our parliamentary building that saw less disruption, when our parliament buildings literally burnt to the ground in the beginning of the 20th century than we did when the COVID-19 pandemic took place. Madam Speaker, democracy matters. Democracy is worth fighting for, and democracy is something that we need to, each and every one of us, need to be diligent and focused on protecting. And Madam Speaker, when we see the sort of antics and behaviors that we do by this Liberal government that seems to have very little respect for our democratic process, they have very little respect for democracy, very little respect for anybody that doesn't agree with them and their ideas of how the country should be run. Now, Madam Speaker, although Conservatives did actually receive more votes in the last election than the Liberals did, that's something that they like to conveniently forget. And the Liberals specifically said that they would not join a coalition with the NDP, which we found out was categorically untrue after only a number of months after the last election. Madam Speaker, it bears upon all of us the responsibility to defend democracy and to make sure that the long standing traditions in this place are preserved. Now, Madam Speaker, we saw a host of challenges that came about because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And although I didn't think that I'd have to spend my first number of months, my first number of months as a member of Parliament fighting to even be able to do my job, to make sure that I was able to represent my constituents in this place, we eventually got to a point where we could ensure that those voices from coast to coast, from sea to sea to sea in this country, Madam Speaker, were heard. It was something that took time and it took effort, and we did get to a point where Hybrid was able to ensure those voices could be heard in the midst of some of those challenging circumstances. But, Madam Speaker, we proved that it was possible, but that doesn't mean that it should be continued in that matter, especially when there are those who would abuse it. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a specific point to emphasize that very thing. And that is, in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that the Liberals, instead of ensuring that they brought the country together, what was one of their first proposals? Well, Madam Speaker, it was quite something, because what the Liberals proposed was not pandemic supports. It was not helping Canadians at a time when it was absolutely necessary. No, Madam Speaker. It was they wanted to grant themselves unlimited taxation and spending authority. That was the Liberals' response to a crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste, they said. And they were going to give themselves unlimited taxation and spending authority without parliamentary approval, spitting in the face of 8 centuries of responsible government. Madam Speaker, it is not without extreme caution that I enter into this debate to say we should be very, very careful in how we approach the seriousness to ensure that we preserve our democratic institutions. And I think, Madam Speaker, specifically to the amendment that's been brought forward, let's make sure that we study this. Let's make sure that we have a sunset on it. Let's make sure that we can carefully evaluate how these dramatic changes to the way that Parliament works, that they can be studied in a fulsome manner to ensure that we can, in fact, do what is best, ultimately for our constituents, ultimately for Canadians. For Madam Speaker, it is only one place in this country, one room in this country, that ensures that every square inch, every person has a voice, and it is this place. Now, Madam Speaker, there is a wide variety of perspectives here. No question. There is a wide variety of personalities, no question. Professions, no question. Political parties, no question. But, Madam Speaker, it is in this place where we are able to accomplish the thing called dialogue and debate, which is so fundamental to the functioning of our democracy. And, Madam Speaker, when it comes to standing up for that, it should be the first and primary responsibility of not only a First Minister, a Prime Minister, not only a government represented through the Cabinet, not only members of every political party, every MP here, but it should be so very much the focus of all of those who have the honor of being able to be a temporary tenant of these green seats in Canada's House of Commons. Yes, Madam Speaker, the unfortunate trend is the government prefers obedience as opposed to opposition. And let me use another example. I think that a very significant example actually has to do with the coalition partners over there at the far end of the House, the fourth party.
Guaranteed.
You see, it's interesting because the NDP, they're much of an opposition party. And this is a great example of this, the debate we're having here. I don't think that there's actually a lot of support from members of the NDP for this sort of thing, because it actually goes contrary to the ideals that they purport to have that go beyond their parliamentary functions in the context of this so-called confidence and supply arrangement. So, Madam Speaker, I think that this is more about either incompetence or laziness, and sometimes it's difficult to tell between the two which it is, because it is when when a fourth party gives a blank check to a government that was elected as a minority, it is unacceptable that they would do so with so little recognition for the impact that has on how our country operates. And, Madam Speaker, you know, I don't know if it is the leader of the NDP is more focused on video games than he is worried about the interests of his party, but I know I speak to a number, and it may surprise some members of the NDP. There are a few of them in my constituency. Only a few, but there are a few members of the NDP. I've heard from a surprising number of them over the last number of months in the last year or so, where there's these what I...
Oh, I'm so sorry. The honourable member's time is like up. I'm so sorry.